Hello, this is Dr. Muriel Rand from New Jersey City University, and this video is on Task 2, the instructional task for the Early Childhood Education Handbook for edTPA. Here are some tips for when you're actually implementing your lessons. You need to remember that they're looking for hands-on, active learning, which really engage your students. You want them moving and dancing and going to centers or working in groups or turn and talks. You want this to be hands-on, not children sitting and listening to the teacher. So again, focus on that during your lesson. It should be in your lesson plans, but just make sure you're doing it. Make sure you ask good questions. There's a whole section in the commentary in which you have to describe how you've elicited responses from students. So if you haven't asked good questions, you're not going to get good responses. Third, make sure you're giving high quality feedback throughout the lesson. And that feedback should be descriptive. So rather than just saying good job or well done, tell them what was good about it. Tell them why they did a good job. Be very descriptive. Also, in your feedback, focus on your learning objective. If your learning objective was to identify the main idea of the book, then when you're giving feedback, say, wow, that's great. You got the main idea of the book. You might be tempted to give feedback about how well they work together or how well they wrote their letters or something like that, which is fine, but make sure that you have descriptive feedback that relates to your objective. Fourth, make sure that you're making the interdisciplinary connections for the children. All of your lessons should have an interdisciplinary focus, but you need to bring that out. You can't assume that the kids will get it. So for example, if you're doing a science and a reading lesson, at some point you want to say to the kids, now remember, scientists use reading so that they can learn more, or we can learn more about science from reading. Do you see the way reading and science go together? Or maybe you were doing writing and art, and you could make the interdisciplinary connections. Look at how we use art when we do our writing. Books have illustrations. When we do art for our writing, we call it an illustration. Do you see how art can help us write better and help our audience understand what we're writing better? That's the kind of connections that you want to make. Also, link to the student's prior learning. So make sure you're saying things like, this is similar to what we did yesterday. Remember when we did a retelling yesterday? Well, today you're going to write a retelling. Like, link to what they have learned in the past and make that very clear to them. And then finally, link to their personal, community, or cultural assets. Let's say that you determined that one of the cultural assets is that in your town, for example, everybody celebrates a fall harvest. So you might say something like, well, you know, Fall Harvest Day is coming up and we're all going to be celebrating that in town. So that's why we're going to be writing stories about pumpkins today to go with the, you know, the fall harvest. Or maybe you'll link to personal assets when you're doing one-on-one with your focused children or in a small group with your focused children and say, I know how much you guys love soccer, so today we're going to write about soccer because the big game is coming up, and this will give you a chance to write about something that you like. Okay, so those are all the things that you want to keep in mind while you're writing the lessons. Personally, what I would do is I would take these 6 things and put them on chart paper and put them on the wall so that I could see them while I'm teaching. I would also, well, we'll get to that in a minute, script out all of these ideas. Let's talk about that. So write out exactly what you're going to say during your lesson, including all the elements that were on the previous slide. So script out your questions, script out possible feedback you could give students. Like, imagine a student who was doing it well and what you would say, and imagine a student who was not doing well and what you would say to get them back on track. Script out how you're going to make those interdisciplinary connections. Write it down. Script out how you will connect to prior learning or personal, cultural, and community assets. Again, write that all down. You can put them on cards. You could put them in a lesson plan. You could put them on a chart that you hang on the wall. Script out also how you will work with your two focus students. What will you say to them? How will you work with them? What kinds of problems do you anticipate? Where do you want to focus your feedback? So write all of this down. Imagine it's really like a script, like a theater script, because in a sense you are performing this lesson, and the better prepared you are, trust me, the better you will teach. Okay, here are some video recording tips. Most important, make sure you practice first. Practice using your phone or iPad. That's what most people use. Check the angles that you can see all the kids, and check that you can hear the students when you're recording. You also want to get your students used to being recorded, because they might, make funny faces at the camera or talk about the camera or say, "Oh, why are you recording us?" So get them real used to that. So record at least a couple of lessons before you do your edTPA lessons. Also, keep the camera running for the whole lesson. Don't turn it off and on. Only when you switch to a small group could you turn it off and on, because your video clips must be continuous. So you don't want any starting and stopping of the video, or you won't be able to use that section. You're going to choose 2 small segments, and the 2 together can't be more than 15 minutes. But make sure that camera's running continuously throughout your whole lesson. Okay, remember that you need focus students. You need 2 of them. And 1 focus student must have a special learning need that you identified in the context for learning. This could be an IEP, a 504 plan. They could be an English language learner. They could just be a slower learner. They could be someone who has focus problems, or that just has trouble learning in some way. You're going to record a video of their work during independent practice in a small group with you, or just the 2 of them. They can be in a small group, or it could be just the 2 of them and you working on whatever is your independent practice in your lesson. Basically, you need to see them using the vocabulary words, and you need to see evidence that they're learning what the objectives for the lesson were. So again, keep the camera running. Don't turn it off. Your video clips must be continuous. So let's get into this a little bit more. What do I mean by continuous video? Think of your video as a ribbon. You are allowed to cut 2 pieces of that ribbon. That's all. You cannot cut 3 or 4 pieces and then stick them together. You need 1 continuous shot. That means no editing, no turning off and on the camera. It's got to be a continuous shot, and you're going to cut 2 sections. You can blur the faces of any child that you don't have permission to film. So when you're choosing your sections, don't worry about that. So how do you choose your video clips? First of all, you're going to watch all your videos once you've done them, and you're going to choose the 2 segments that best show your teaching. 1 segment is from a whole group part of the lesson, and 1 segment is the small group with your 2 focus children. And they could be from different lessons. So you could take your whole group from lesson 1 and your small group from lesson 2. That's fine. And together, the videos must be less than 2 minutes. So you could have 1 that's 8 minutes, 1 that's 7 minutes. You could have 1 that's 10 minutes, 1 that's 5 minutes. The minimum they can be is 3 minutes. And believe it or not, 7 or 8 minutes or 10 minutes, you can actually see a lot of teaching in that amount of time. Okay, so how do you do this cutting and compressing of the video? Most students I've found use a mobile app such as Perfect Video. You can get that in the App Store to cut the video clips from the larger file, and they do it right on their phone or right on their iPad. The file size of the video clip is important, and you might not realize that, but video files can be very, very large because your camera is very high quality, so it shoots with very, very large video sizes. So the size of the file is not necessarily the length of it. So in other words, you could have a 10-minute video that's 5,000 megabytes, or you could have a 10-minute video that's 100 megabytes. One is going to look better than the other. So if you have a very good camera, chances are you're going to have to compress your video, and the target file size is 200 to 300 megabytes or less. Otherwise, you won't be able to upload it on the Pearson site. And again, the video apps can do that for you. So again, look at Perfect Video or something else that you like to use for your video app. Once again, if you have inadvertently included individuals for whom you do not have permission to film, you can use that same software to blur the faces of these individuals, and this is not considered editing. That's allowable. So for example, you didn't get permission from Johnny to be in the film, and you're doing fine. Johnny's sitting over at the side, and then all of a sudden he walks right across the camera in the middle of your small group. Don't worry about that. You could still use that clip. You're just going to blur out his face. Okay, now I want to also talk about task 3. You don't have to worry about this yet, but I just want you to know it so that when you're teaching, you make sure that you have this as part of your video. In task 3, you're going to need to submit video evidence of learning for each of your focus children, and you're going to have to submit video evidence of each focus of the feedback that you give to each focus child, or written evidence. So if you are doing a writing project, for example, you could write right on their papers. But otherwise, you're going to have additional video clips that show, again, the learning, how each focus child learned, evidence that they learned what you taught them, and evidence of the feedback that you gave each child. And then third, evidence of their vocabulary use. So either a video or work sample showing them using those actual words. So once again, while you're filming, make sure that you're capturing that on your video. Okay, now that the videos are done, you're going to do your instructional commentary. Like the planning commentary, you're going to download the Word template from Blackboard, and you're going to type right into it. There are 5 questions, although each question has multiple parts. And in each of those questions, it asks you to give examples from your 2 video clips. You can't use examples that are not in your clips. So that's why you have to make sure your clips show as much as you possibly can. And you're going to use a timestamp each time you give an example. So here's an excerpt from one of my students from last semester. At 1 second in the second video, he was able to use the vocabulary word to describe that the planets orbit around the sun. At 1 minute 50 seconds, I asked him to repeat his question. He did not remember the question he made up, so I had to prompt him to remember. At 2 minutes 12 seconds, I can confirm that he knew and understood the word orbiting because he answered my question promptly. What are the planets doing around the sun? So you see how you use those timestamps. That allows the scorer to go right to that section of the video and see what you were talking about. A reminder about confidentiality. You're going to remove your name and use pseudonyms or general references for your state, school, district, and the cooperating teacher. So while you're filming, don't use any of those words. For your work samples, you're going to mask or you're going to remove all the names on typed or written materials. So when you're videotaping, don't videotape kids' names. And don't use only the children's first names when you're videotaping. Don't use their last names. Also, just a reminder, do not share your video on any publicly accessible platforms or websites. If they find this out, you will fail. So in summary, you're going to videotape a whole group lesson, 2 focus students learning, which is best if you're videotaping what your assessment is. You're going to videotape giving feedback to the focus students. You're going to videotape the students using the vocabulary words, and you're going to keep the camera going, and you're not going to turn it on and off during the filming. What do you actually submit? This is much simpler than task 1. For part A, you just submit your 2 video files, and those are all the different types of file structures that you could use. And you want to include the learning experience number in the video file name. So you could say learning experience 1, whole group, learning experience 3, small group, something like that. And then part B, you're going to upload your instructional commentary. So that's it for task 2. Let's look at the scoring rubrics to see what the scorers are going to be looking for. In rubric 6, they're going to be looking for the learning environment. And score point 3, which is the minimum that you can get to pass, the candidate demonstrates rapport with and respect for children, and the candidate provides a positive, low-risk learning environment that demonstrates mutual respect among children. So keep it positive. Don't yell at the kids. Don't get frustrated. Don't get upset. Keep it positive, show your good relationships with them and that you can manage the class. In Rubric 7, they're going to be looking for how well the children are engaged in the learning experiences and that they're doing language and literacy through at least one modality that supports the active nature of children's learning. So in other words, they're looking for active hands-on activities and that the students are all engaged. They're also looking to see that you link children's development and prior academic learning to new learning. So make sure you make those connections to what they were learning before to this new learning. Rubric 7 is called Deepening Children's Learning, and it says that candidate elicits children's responses. In other words, you ask good questions to promote their understanding of language and literacy. So script out those questions, have them all ready to go. Rubric 9 is the interdisciplinary learning that we talked about. So in the clips, the candidate makes interdisciplinary connections to promote language and literacy development. So it has to be in your clip. So make sure you're saying this a lot. Make sure you're making these connections frequently so that any given clip that you take will have those interdisciplinary connections. And then Rubric 10 is analyzing teaching effectiveness. For score point 3, the candidate proposes changes that address children's collective learning needs related to the central focus. Now, what this means is that when you're writing this section on how you could have improved your lesson, how you could have done it better, you need to focus on how you could have taught the objectives better. They don't want you to focus on classroom management. They don't want you to say, oh, I could have prepared the students better, I could have lined them up better, I could have kept it more quiet. They don't want that. They want to know how you could have taught the learning objective better. So I could have given more support for vocabulary. I could have provided more vocabulary words. I could have modeled the vocabulary a little better. I could have modeled the reading better. I could have modeled the writing better. I could have given them more examples. Do you see what I mean? What you are proposing would be better has to relate to your learning objective. And also that you make connections to research and or developmental theory. So have something in there about research and developmental theory. And that's the end. So make sure you read the handbook for planning task 2. Come back to this video again and again if you need it, and you're going to do great.